let's just review the Shita of Rav Chisda so that we can, make a smooth start. We are on Daf Peites Amid Beis. We made some progress yesterday. And we're up to Amalei Rabba Rav Chisda, which is about 10 lines down from the top. Now, Rav Chisda said that in the case where he's torem from Tameh onto Tar, Rabbanan made a takana that which he was mafresh is not chal at all. It's meaningless. It's not valid. On a doraisa level, he shouldn't have done what he did. He should have been mafresh min atome al atar, but b'di'evet, if he did so, the Torah recognizes that afrasha, and the tameh is now truma and requires sreifa. Rav Chisda said that the Rabbanan found it necessary to completely undermine and vitiate that truma, that afrasha. It doesn't exist. And even the tameh is tevel, and it's not truma. The reason why the Chachamim saw fit to do so and completely negate his afrasha is because they were worried that if they recognize his afrasha, then in the eyes of the people, they will think it's a perfectly good afrasha, and little do they know that they have to repeat a afrasha min atar al atar, and that the tar remains tevel until there's another afrasha. They won't realize that. In their mind, they'll jump the gun and conclude that since the original afrasha is valid, therefore the tar is no longer tevel. It already had afrasha. Amalei Rav Rav Chisda l'didach di amrit lo asav lo klum kol ikar, according to your interpretation, that the Rabbanan completely negated that afrasha of Tomei al atar. Dafilu ahu griva, even that part of the griva means the peros, the produce that he was mafresh, is hadol etivle. Even the tameh that he was mafresh goes back to its original state of tevel because afrasha is meaningless. My timer. And why did the Chacham go that far? Zera. They were afraid, Dilma Pashamal or mafresh, they were afraid that if they recognize and validate the original afrasha, the people will think in their minds there's no need for a second afrasha to replace the first afrasha. Could it be, have we any precedent for the authority of the Chachamim to take afrashas truma, which is valid according to the Torah law, and they could undermine the status of that afrasha? And therefore it goes back to the state of chulin, when on a doraisa level it's truma. Could you imagine if a non-Kohen would eat this griva, this collection of produce on a doraisa level? He's chayav misa b'dei shamayim, and the Rabbanan are going to negate the hafrasha, and therefore it becomes chulin. V'chi bezdin masnin lakar dovim in Torah. Does bezdin have the power, the authority to completely undermine the Torah law? The Torah calls it truma, and the Rabbanan could say it's chulin, it's not truma. Do they have that authority? This is very relevant to this week's parsha, because is it this week's parsha or next week's parsha? Lo sasu mikol asher yorucha, or maybe it's next week's parsha. The Rabbanan were granted authority by the Torah, but do they have the authority to go ahead and take truma and magically make it into chulin? We know that in the case of marriage, the Rabbanan could be oker the marriage. They could completely undermine the marriage, but that's because kol makadesh adaita the Rabbanan mekadesh. when the person got married, he says, his das, his understanding was that his kedushin is contingent on the validation of that ksuba, of that kedushin by the Rabbanan. If they invalidate the kedushin, then he's out of here, and he doesn't want the kedushin. But in the case of truma, the man was mafresh truma, and the Torah recognizes and validates that truma. Now the Rabbanan come along and they can completely undermine the status of truma, make it into fluid. So the Karen Ora, one of the great achronim of 150 years ago, 200 years ago, he says, wait a minute, I don't understand what bothers the Gemara. Truma is a result of what we call a verbal declaration. It's called Kedushas Piv. He sanctifies this part of the mixture of his produce as Truma. Rabbanan should have the koach, the authority, to nullify his declaration. Ulevatel es dvara. Once they mevatel his dibur, then memela there's no chalot truma, because the status of truma is a result of his dibur, and the Rabbanan have the koach to be mevatel his dibur. Says the Karen Ora, even Shatora Omer Shechala Kedushas Truma La Peros. Even though again he shouldn't have been mafresh from Tomei, but if he did so, the Torah validates his hafrasha and his Kedushas Truma in Boyim Levatel is Divrei HaMafresh. If we're going to come along and now say that which is Kadosh B'Kedushas Truma is no longer Kadosh, because we're going to nullify his original declaration when he pronounced this as Truma, that itself is being Oker Dov Min HaTorah. You're taking the Kedushas Truma that's inherent in the Peros and you're removing it. Now there's another principle that grants authority to the Chacham called Hefker Bezdin Hefker. If that be the case, then the Rabbanan could declare that these payros that he designated as Truma, the Tmeim, are not his. The Rabbanan could take it out of his possession under the law of Hefker Bezdin Hefker. The Mela, if they're not his, he can't be Mafresh Truma. What would the Gemara bother? Kevan Shi Acharkach Shuv Yu Aperos Bershuso. Yimavur B'Gemara Shedino B'Tevel Kitevel V'Chayv LaHafresh Lo Shayach Lo Mishkacham Ifkiu B'Menu Aperos. What's going to happen is that the Rabbanan require him to replace this hafresh with another hafresh. Well, if it's not his payros, because they flex the muscle of Hefker Bezdin Hefker, then what do you mean he has to be mafresh payros? Mafresh truma from these payros they don't belong to. So in the back of the Gemara we have Likutei Yalkut Habirui. Let me just tell you what page we're up to. I think we're up to page Tezayin. No, Yud Zayin. You have Yud Zayin? Hiksha Karen Ora, Madua Nechshav Adovol Akira, Rekduchas Truvena Chalam Memela El Ayidei Piv, Shalom Mafresh, and Ken Chachamim, Mikoch Takanasam Bidlu Es Dvarav, Umemela Lo Chala Kedushas Truvela Peros, V'Tirates, Kevan Shatora Omer Chala Kedushas Truvela Peros, Gam Kisha Ovar, okay, fine, is Bitul Divrei HaMafresh, Nechshav Lakiras Dovim Min HaTorah. So that's a summary of what we saw in the name of the Keren. With Tosis Hikshu, Shemef Kiru Rabbana Mimenu Es HaPeros, B'Shas HaFrosha, V'If Kiru. The Rabbana made it, then Hefker, they took away his ownership on the Peros. Then Cain Eni Yochel LaHafrish, Ula'achel Aleim Shem Truma, Kevon She'enam Shalo. Irtu Atosis Shem Cain Enolov, Mikanu La'bo Chiyuv, LaHafrish, Ulasaknam, Kevon Shem Hefker, V'enam Shalo. V'Pashta Gemara Mashma, Shalo Chal Shem Tru Al HaPeros. He has to replace it with a second hafrosha. Now he quotes the Ritva. Divrei Rav Chizda she hamufresh min hatomei utevel gomu mikoach bezdin hefker Rabban Efkiu Aperes Mirshusa Rei Truma Shelo B'Bailan Vienna Truma. Yesh Lakshish and Fruit from Marshal Kivara Shrelo Tirza Gemara Shem Mafresh Sat Truma B'Tomei Al Atar Efkiu Rabban Aperes Mimenu. Mikoach Hefker Bezdin Hefker. And now he quotes the Achronim. They don't understand the teretz of Tosfos because why couldn't the Chacham be mafkir saperos only for a period of time? Excuse me. Only l'zman hafrosha, in order to prevent hafrosha from being chal. Miyad achakach yachzeru lebaluso shel hamafresh. And the premise of this question is that the Chachamim through Hefker Bezdin Hefker can not only remove ownership, but they could create ownership. They could take something that's hefker and make it into yours. Yesh lomar shekavonas hatotzius she'im nomar shefkiru es haperos b'shas hafrosha afil is man areim ptur mikano lahaba mimaser. Once they were hefker for one moment in time, they are potter. Hefker is a chalashem ptur of trumas and maisvus. L'chein afim chazul abaluso shalom afrish einhem chayovim b'trumas and maisvus. Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara's answer. Amar le. After Rabbah presents this objection to Rav Chizda responds, "The atlo tizvara, are you going to deny that yesh koch biat chachamim lakar dovim in Torah?" I'm going to quote to you an explicit Mishnah right here in Masechet Yevamot and prove from the Mishnah that yesh koch biat chachamim lakar dovim in Torah. In the case of a woman whose husband went out to Medina Sayyam, they came and they told her Mace Bailo. She got married to the second guy. And then her husband shows up. And the Rabbanim made a knas. And what was that knas? Shavlad mamzer mizeh umizeh. That whether or not she goes back to her first husband or to her, or continues her relationship with the second husband, in both situations, the children of such a relationship will be mamzeret. So Bishlema Misheni, I understand why if she continues with her escapade with her sheni, that the child of such an intimacy is a mamzer, because the Torah law is that she's an Eishes Ish. I mean, her husband is still alive and well. Elami Baila Rishon Amai. Why should the child from her first husband be a mamzer? Meaning, if now she has a relationship with her first husband, the child is a mamzer? Ishtori. They're married. Yisrael Ma'alyu. The child is a full-fledged Yisrael. You can give him shlishi, and if his father's a kohen, you can give him kohen. You can duchen. Is that a mamzer? Elo one. The Rabbanan made him into a mamzer. is kosharita lebimamzeres. Now he's allowed to marry a mamzeres. He's not a mamzer according to Torah law. The Rabbanan made him into a mamzer, and now he's going to be able to marry a mamzeres. The Torah would not allow him to marry a mamzeres. We see clearly, therefore, that the Chachamim have the koch, they have the authority to be oker dover min Torah. According to the Torah, he's a Jewish, he's a kosher, he's not allowed to marry a mamzeres, and we're going to allow him to marry a mamzeres. So Rabbi said to Rav, you're missing the correct interpretation of our Mishnah. When our Mishnah says that the Vlad from the Rishon is a mamzer, he's not allowed to marry a mamzer, even though he's a mamzer, because he's only a mamzer midrabanan. And on a doraisa level, he's kosher. V'chein ki asa Ravin or Rabbi Yochanan asa b'mamzeres. So my korele mamzer also b'bas Yisrael. He's not allowed to marry a Jewish girl who has proper lineage, but he cannot marry a mamzeres either. Now I'm going to take a leap of faith, and I'm going to say that the only woman he's allowed to marry is a giores. Let's see. Do we have okay, right now I have no way of proving my theory. So it's just with limited liability. Because if he marries a Gioris, a Gioris is allowed to marry a Mamzer. And Yisrael is allowed to marry a Gioris. So Mimonashah, whether you call me Yisrael on a Doraisa level and a kosher, or whether you call him a Mamzer Rabbanan, he's allowed to marry a Gioris. Yeah, I think I'm right. I don't know why nobody says this. Now again, Rav Chis is going to go back into the, back up to plate and come up with another proof that Yech Koch B'yad Chacham Lakar Dovanator. Shalach le Rav Chisda l'Rabba b'yad Rav Acha bar Rav Huna v'chi ein bezdin maslim Lakar Dovanator v'sanyu. We have a brisa me'em asay odom yorishes ishto ktana. So we're talking about what's called Kiddushay Miyun, Mem Yud Aleph Vav Nun, meaning this woman who's a Ketana lost her father, and Midrabanan, her mother, or his mother, or, no, talk about a Ketana, sorry, her mother, could marry her off, or her brothers can marry her off. And that's called Kiddushay Miyun. Now, if this young girl tragically dies, then can her husband inherit her possession? Beit Shammai Omer, Mishetamo Bikom Masa. Her husband only has rights to inherit her if she reached Pirka. Pirka means puberty. If she became a Gedolah. That's called Mishetamo Bikom Masa. Rashi says Mishetamo Bikom Masa Kishetagil Pirka Bishonim Ubavas Sar. Seyon. So it means she's 12 years old and she has 2 hairs. Beis Hillel Omrim, Misha Tikanes L'chuppah. I don't have to wait until Pirka, until she's 12 years old. Whatever age she is, once she was brought into the chuppah, because her brother married her off to so-and-so, then that person has rights to be Yoresh. Rabbi Eliezer over Mishati Boya, that the husband's rights to inherit this young girl only emerge after they had their first intimacy. The Yarsha Umetamila Bocheles Begino Truma. If her husband is a Kohen, then not only will he inherit her, but he will bury her. And he will contract Tumah, which is a violation of the Torah law. A Kohen is not allowed to bury the dead. He can bury the dead if it's his wife, but this girl is not his wife. She was not married off to him by her father. Her father's gone. And not only that, this young girl is allowed to eat truma. Why? Because her husband is a Kohen, and the marriage relationship is only a D'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic invention. And yet we're going to be matir her husband, who's a Kohen, to be metame law. We're going to be matir her to eat truma. Based on Ishus D'Rabbanan, Yidushay Miyu. According to Beit Shammai, we don't need chuppah over here. Why? Because even if there was only Erison without Nisuin, but now she's a Gedolah, Mishatamo Bikomasa. So the Gemara is not happy with this. Why? Because the halacha of Yerusha depends upon Nisuin. If the first stage of marriage, which is called Erison, was implemented, and then Nebuchadnezzar died before they had to consummate the marriage under the chuppah, then he doesn't inherit her. Her inheritance, her estate goes to her father. So how then could Beit Shammai claim that Mishetamod B'Komasa Afal Gav Delo Nichlas Chuppah? She's still in Arusa. And Arusa, even if she was a Gedolah, her husband doesn't inherit her. And if her husband is a Kohen, he's not going to be mitameh to her, to bury her, unless it was after Chuppah. The Gemara explains, Ema, perhaps what Beit Shammai had in mind was Mishetamod B'Komasa V'tikones L'Chuppah. V'hachi ka'amar lahu Beit Shammai leBeit Hillel Dikam Risu. You said Mishetikones L'Chuppah. You're right, but only if Amda B'Komasa and Mahanyule Chuppah. Ilo lo Mahanyule Chuppah. Under what circumstances will chuppah be enough to bequeath to the husband the rights to inherit her? That's only if amba b'komasa. It's not enough to have knisa l'chuppah if she's still a ketana. But if she was pirka, she reached pirka, amba b'komasa, and on top of that, she was brought into the chuppah, then the husband can inherit his wife. Rabbi Eliezer Mishatik Boil. When does a husband gain rights to inherit her? That's only after they consummated the marriage with intimacy. So the Gemara asks, if you're talking about Misha Boil, Tiboil, and again she's a Ketana, Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer, he himself says, Ein Maisa Ketana Klu. Now, what does that mean, Ein Maisa Ketana Klu? She got married when she was a Ketana. And her Nisuin are meaningless. She's a Ketana. Nisuin clinches the kinyan of Ishus, but she's not capable of kinyanim. She's only a Ketana. So what difference does it make, according to you, Rabbi Eliezer, if she was Nivala? Why should that give her the status of a Nesua, such that now with her death, her husband inherits her? And Gemara says, Ema mishetagdil v'tiboel. That Rabbi Eliezer means to say that if she reached Gadlus, and then her husband consummated an intimacy with her, he inherits her. We see clearly that Rabbi Eliezer requires shetagdil. There's Rav Chizda Ktani Mias Yarsha. The Brisa says that the husband will inherit his wife, who's a Ketana. V'hachamidaraisa Avua Yarisle. Who has the right to inherit her when she dies? It's her father. That's on a Doraisa level because the Torah never recognized this marriage of her brother or her mother. That's only a Takanas Chachamim. And therefore, it's only Midrabanan Yoris Labal. This entire brisa that we studied is predicated on the premise that a marriage D'Rabbanan is enough to generate a Zchus Yerusha. The Bela says, Rav Chizda, you see clearly that Yesh Koach V'Yad Chachamim, Lakar Dom Min HaTorah. Min HaTorah, the Yerusha should go to our father, and the Rabbanan created a new entity called marriage with a Ketana, and as a result of that, they removed the status of the father and his ability to inherit her, and they replaced it with her husband. He will inherit her, not the father. And we could anticipate the Gemara's answer, Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. With regard to Yerusha, we're talking about ownership over possessions, over the estate. And here the Rabbanan certainly have the authority to bump off her father and award the Yerusha to her husband based on Kiddushay D'Rabbanan because of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. So when they established the Yerusha of Kiddushay Ketana, that's not a manifestation of Yesh Koch V'Yad Chacham Lakar Bin HaTorah. No, that's just an expression of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. The Rabbanan will decide who inherits the estate of this girl. Now, you might ask, well, how do we know that the Rabbanan have the authority of Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker? The Rav Yitzchak, Minayin Shehefker Bezdin Hefker Shenemar This is what Ezra is talking to Klal Yisrael, and he declares, "Kol asher lo yovo l'shloshta yomim b'atzas asor v'azkenim yechram kol rishkusho v'yibadel mikahal adol." Ezra invited all the members of the community to a very urgent meeting, and he threatened them. He said, if you don't come to the meeting, I'll give you up to 72 hours. Then Yechram Kol Rechusha, that you no longer own any possessions. I'm going to be mafkir all your possessions. That's what Ezra was telling Klal Yisrael. And from this, we derive the conclusion that Yesh Koach behefker bezin hefker. Rabbi Eliezer Amar Mihocha, he has an alternative derivation. Behefker bezin hefker. And where is this pasuk from? Just a second. This is Elazar Cohen and Yeshua ben Nun when they were dividing up the land al pi Koro. I'm assuming this is from Sefer Yoshua. The Sifta has disappointed me a little bit. Let me look in Torah. Or Ele Anachos, yeah, Yoshua. I think it says Perak Yutes. Ele Anachos Asher Michalu Elazar Cohen Yeshua ben Nun v'Rashi Avos Lamatos B'nei Yisrael. V'chima inyon Roshim Eitzel Avos. In other words, it should have said in the pasuk V'Roshei Matos B'nei Yisrael, and instead it says V'Roshei Ha'avos Lematos B'nei Yisrael. No. I'm sorry. It should have said V'Roshei Matos B'nei Yisrael, left out the word Ha'avos. That's the extra word. So the Roshim are a representation or an allusion to Bezdin. They are the Roshei Am. And they are able to be manchil. They can be makne mama. So I don't know right now. Maybe we'll pick that up tomorrow, but I don't know right now if there's an afkamina between deriving Hefker Bezdin Hefker from Yoshua and Elazar Cohen, or deriving Hefker Bezdin from Avos Hamanchilim B'neihem. See, I'm thinking out loud. I don't know if there's enough gemina between the two, but I could maybe propose a theory as to why each one excluded the other one. For example, if you ask me why Rabbi Lazar excluded Rabbi Yitzchak's derivation, that's because of knas, meaning you would have to limit the authority of Bezdin to be mafkir someone's nechasim to a case of a person who was guilty, in this case, because he didn't show up for this satzas asor vaskenim that Ezra demanded. But if someone was acting properly, I don't know that there's a din of hefker bezdin hefker. Therefore, Rabbi Loza needs his drasha from Chalukas Eretz Yisrael, Chalukas Nachlos, where there was no violation on anyone's part. On the other hand, Rabbi Yitzchak might reject the Alfusa of Rabbi Loza because when they divided up the land, they did so al pi gorel. So maybe it's the gorel itself that effectuated the haknos mama and the nachlo. Okay, then. So let's stop with umetame law. Here on Daf Pei Tesamid Beis. Where is it? Just lost it. 4 lines up from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Umetame. So just to summarize, at this point, we don't have a successful attempt at substantiating Rav Chizda that Yesh Koch V'Yad Chachamim from any source because we pushed it away. We were dochet, right? We deflected it, I guess you'd say. Because this din of Yerusha, in the case of Ishus D'Rabbanan, that the husband will inherit his wife, that's based on Hefker Bezdin Hefker, which Kuliyamalo Pligi, nobody denies that that's within the purview of the jurisdiction of the Rabbanan. But to take Truma and make it into Chulin, that Rav Chizda, it still remains for Rav Chizda to prove such a thing. Okay, then? So that's where we're going to stop for today.